Near mint condition, the home of collected editions.
That cover's so awesome.
Absolute format is the best way to own this store. Time to empty those wallets and fill those shelves. How's it going, all you minties? This is the Uncanny Omar from Near Mint Condition, the home of collected editions. And it is back. That's right. The reading order segment is back. Back by popular demand. And today, it is the Transformers Comprehensive Reading Order and Collected Edition, Part 3, wrapping up this series. So we're talking about from 2005 until present day, the IDW era to the Image Skybound era. So let's go ahead and get started. The very first thing I want to say is thank you to all of you that have been asking me about this Part 3. It's been about 10 months since Part 2 came out. Thank you to all the wonderful patrons for making videos like this possible. If you want the written documentation for the Transformers or any of our reading guides, that can be found on our Patreon, and the description of the video has the link to our Patreon. So a big thank you for all of you that have been patient. And a big thank you to Dom of X for helping me out with other type of videos and putting blurbs on, just so I can focus on these type of segments again, because I've missed doing them, but it does take a while to read through these again, and it was a blast reliving a lot of memories. So today we are looking at the Transformers reading order in collected editions part 3. This is the final part. I thought about splitting this up into 4 parts, but I was like, nah, let's knock it all out at once, so I can't focus too much on each book like I normally do. But I'm also going to be talking a little bit about the history of how it got from IDW and then over to Image Comics and what they were able to put out. If you want to go and check out the previous videos, the links are in the description of the video as well. And I'm back to doing reading orders, and it makes me so happy. And the very next thanks I need to give is to Red Locust for providing the music for this segment right here, this Transformers reading order part 3. They appear courtesy of Distortion Productions. So a big thank you to Red Locust for letting us use the background music for this video. Now, before I get started officially, don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe, and ring that bell for notifications. We are starting with Transformers the IDW Collection, Volume 1. Alright, so let's go ahead and crack the first book open. Why is my ribbon right there? Now, if you're wondering, wait a minute, Omar, IDW didn't finish out the hardcovers. Are you going to talk about the missing trade paperbacks that will finish out Phase 3? I absolutely will. So IDW is who ended up getting the license right after Dreamwave folded in January of 2025. In June, they swoop up their license from Hasbro, and then it was announced that they would be coming back with a brand new issue number 0 in 2006, not 2006. But it would relaunch the series. You didn't need to read anything else, and the way they did it was really interesting by starting a series of just mini-series, all with issue number 0 that's kicked it off, and you had creators like Simon Furman coming in from Dreamwave, and of course the original Transformers UK and Transformers Marvel, and Don Figueroa, who came in as the artist. And that was one of the best things that happened to Dreamwave Studios, was finding some of these wonderful artists that would later come over to IDW to work for them with Transformers. And oh my gosh, I love the hardcovers. The Phase 1 hardcovers, Phase 2 and Phase 3 are just the way that I love collecting them, because what makes these really interesting, by the way, I am putting, like I always do, what is collected in Volume 1. Let's go ahead and start looking at Volume 2, is the fact that they collect these in the best reading order, not publishing order, but the way that IDW believes that these should be read. For example, Volume 1 kicked off with Megatron Origins, which is such an awesome take on Megatron. He pretty much becomes almost like your civil rights leader. It's kind of like retelling the fall of the Roman Empire, but through the Cybertronian ways. And in this volume right here, we get things like Stormbringer, which takes place in the past. And then we get to the series like Infiltration and Escalation. And I thought that was such a unique concept to introduce the readers to these characters for the first time. And in these miniseries that Simon Furman was writing, what he was doing was putting these Autobots on Earth. So let's keep moving because we got a lot to talk about. Now, in Volume 3 is where you start seeing more of these stories shaped together into a bigger story. Even though they were miniseries, they're all telling one continuing story. And again, by most of it Simon Furman. And there are a couple stories that take place in the past, but like I said, the editors at the time at IDW thought this was the best way to collect them. Now, what the hell are the Avengers doing here? Well, Transformers was just blowing up. As a matter of fact, issue 0 was their best-selling comic at IDW for the time. So they wanted to initiate a crossover with the Marvel Comics. So the new Avengers end up crossing over with the Transformers for this little mini-series. Is it canon? Not really, and it just makes for a fun story. I love that cover, by the way. But another thing that they started doing at IDW was also introducing spotlights, because while the Transformers were being awakened here on Earth, so you had characters like Ratchet and Sunstreaker and Optimus, Wheeljack. You didn't see a lot of the other characters that much, but you did get to see characters like Six Shot and, of course, some of the Decepticons that were only available as toys here and came from the Japanese series. So there was, if there was the continuation like Headmasters in Japan, a lot of those characters start showing up here. So one of the coolest things they did, let's keep on moving and go to Volume 4. And this is Volume 4, was also introduce the concept of spotlights to get you to know these characters a little more. So this one, for example, Spotlight Cyclonus. This is E.J. Sue, I believe, who's a phenomenal artist. I mean, him and Nick Roche and Guido Guidi, Amuri Osori, as I mentioned, Don Figura, and Robbie Musso, Rob Ruffalo. Those are just some of the artists that came in here. Of course, Simon Furman taking a lot of this with Nick Roche and Stuart Moore. But the spotlights were really cool because they're also a continuing storyline of what's happening, introducing you to the concept of the Dark Universe, the Dead Universe, where you see a lot of Transformers. And I'm not going to spoil, of course, because I try to do these spoiler-free, except for one part of the faces that I'll let you know ahead of time. Where they get you to know these characters that could be dead and they're coming from an alternate universe, which leads into the big fight here in Phase 1 at the end. So, unfortunately, what people wanted to see was this is the introduction of Drift, who's an awesome character, new to the comics, was more and more of Cybertron. People didn't care, readers at the time, didn't care about the fight that's happening on Earth. So Simon Furman does end up leaving the book. And he ends up leaving with the Dinobots, Maximum Dinobots. That's kind of his last hurrah, wrapping up his era during this phase of Transformers. So what happens next? Well, that takes place in Volume 5, which really should have Megatron here on the cover. So this is when we get Shane McCarthy's All Hell Megatron story. I love this story. This is probably regarded to a lot of people as the very first best ongoing title, because it lasted a lot longer. I wanted to call it a mini-series or a maxi-series, but at the time it was the only ongoing series. I love this freaking book so much. One of my favorite lines is... let me see, it's Megatron talking about Starscream. Starscream's just, being pompous like he usually is, wrecking havoc here on Earth, and Megatron steps in and he's like, "That's your problem, Starscream. You talk big when everything about you is small." Oh my god, so badass. So remember when I said people were complaining about, Transformers being here on Earth and Simon Furman taking a step back? Well, we're still here on Earth. But this time, Megatron has won. That's what this story entails of. The Decepticons have taken over Earth. You have the Earth forces that are fighting back. These are characters that were introduced previously that were merging with Transformers, trying to get that type of technology. But the Autobots, they're not dead. They're just in Cybertron. And this story was so freaking awesome. Lasted, like I mentioned, 16 issues, included because it included the codas. But focusing less and less on the humans and more on this huge Civil War fight, taking place about a year after the events of Volume 4. So now, after this, we get Volume 6. And in Volume 6 is when we finally get an ongoing series. But this time around, it's Nick Costa writing Transformers, the ongoing series. We still have spotlights and probably regarded as one of the best, if not the very best, miniseries, and that's Last Stand of the Wreckers. That one is by James Roberts and Nick Roche, working together for the first time. Oh my gosh. So the ongoing series, really, even though this is still, let's go back here to the beginning, Don Figueroa's artwork, what ends up happening here, and a lot of us noticed, is that he starts taking a lot of liberties with the characters, and was probably because editorial told that, hey, why don't we make these characters look a little bit more like their movie counterparts? So that's what he does. He reimagines these characters and draws them like the movie counterparts. Less like the cartoon G1, but more like the Transformer movies. Now, of course, the spotlights and the miniseries do their own thing. But I wanted to talk about Last Stand of the Wreckers. Last Stand of the Wreckers, oh my gosh, introduces us to the concept of the Wreckers, who are these badass crew. Oh my gosh, I have so much to talk about. Okay, who's this badass crew that is going and helping out a spaceship that is sent out a distress signal. Spaceship was carrying Overlord, one of the most baddest of the baddest asses in Cybertron. And it could be that he has taken over the ship. Oh my gosh, I love this mini. This miniseries will set the tone of Phase 2 for the series that follows The Lost Light. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second, but this is the type of artwork. And, you know, a lot different than the artwork that Dawn was doing in the main series. But we are getting a main series finally. Let's go to the next volume. I absolutely love the way the hardcovers are done. Just so freaking awesome, where you show E.J. Sue's piece of art here, and then the back showing a piece of that character's arm or body part. And you have another miniseries right here, Infestation, and then you get more of the Mike Costa run on Transformers. But the art style changing again to, probably because of complaints, I'm not sure, changing it more to a cartoony feel. Now, I will say, you know, characters do end up dying through here. Characters do end up coming back from the dead through here. And the stakes are completely up for the Autobots and Decepticons now. Still taking the fight here mostly on Earth, and leading to something called the Chaos storyline, which brings up again the dead universe. Because in this particular incarnation of Transformers, we have Megatron and Galvatron are two separate beings. Unlike if you read the Marvel stuff, I know I didn't get into details about it, but if you read the Marvel series, they're kind of one and the same. Or if you've seen the movie, you know what I'm talking about. The movie is where they're like one and the same. So Phase 1 ends up wrapping up with this Heart of Darkness storyline. And Heart of Darkness and Chaos Theory all lead into Chaos. Now, this is where I'm going to talk just a little bit about spoilers, because I have to talk about what makes Phase 2 so different and why so many people love Phase 2. So just minor spoilers as to what happens here, because this kicks off Phase 2. The war's over, and you can find out exactly how it's over by reading the book, but the war is done after this. There's the war between Autobots and Decepticons is done. They are done fighting. So now we have a new era of Transformers, and that kicks off Phase 2. Now, if you're enjoying these videos, please don't forget to smash that like button. Phase 2. Now, I've talked about Phase 2 in the past. My daughter and I talked about, she was 11 and now she's, oh my gosh, 14. That's crazy. But Phase 2 kicks off with something called the Death of Optimus Prime. And I'll talk about that here in a second. And then you have James Roberts and Nick Roche teaming up again for More Than Meets the Eye. Then you have Robots in Disguise by John Barber and Andrew Griffith. And, oh my gosh. So, The death of Optimus Prime is pretty much a story how Optimus is just done. The war is over. The Decepticons have lost. Now the Autobots have to reclaim Cybertron. We're introduced to new characters here again, like Metalhawk, and they want to call back the Cybertronians. They're people that stand against Optimus and what his decisions were, and there are people that hold the Autobots accountable. There are people that are Decepticon people. There are Cybertronians that are still claiming the Decepticon role, and that comes into play later on. So what ends up happening is that he's done. So he takes the Matrix of leadership, and pops it in two, gives half to Rodimus and half to Bumblebee. Rodimus decides to take a group of Autobots with him, not just Autobots, Cybertronians, sorry, and go on a ship called the Lost Light to look for the legendary Knights of Cybertron. He takes characters like Whirl, like really not popular characters, you know, if you were a fan of the cartoon or even the Marvel comics. Drift goes with him, Ultra Magnus, Tailgate, and like I mentioned, Whirl, Cyclonus, oh my gosh, Rung, there's new characters that are introduced, Skids, just to name a few of these characters. And oh my gosh, it is just a blast. Because it's just adventures in space. While Bumblebee is dealing with the politics of Cybertron. What do you do with a planet that you just won its freedom? Now, this is when Starscream starts switching sides and decides to side with Bumblebee. And again, you have renegades, Decepticons that are not wanting to give up the role of Decepticons, even though there are no more Decepticons. So this story continues like this for a while, where you have two of these series, and they're just focusing on these two series. We still have mini-series going on, like you have the trilogy, the Autocracy trilogy. There's still spotlights happening here, but the spotlights, again, play a big part, and they're mapped perfectly through here. This right here is a flashback of Cybertron in the way it was. While you still have the Adventures in Space with the Lost Light, and then you have the Robots in the Skies comic, and More Than Meets the Eye. They're separated. And Robots in the Skies is, of course, written by John Barber, while More Than Meets the Eye is written by James Roberts. And we're introduced to, oh my gosh, this group of villains right here. This is some of mine and my daughter's favorite villains, led by Tarn. This is a group of Decepticons that no longer feel like they need to answer to Autobots or Decepticons if there's not going to be any, but they also don't want to abide by the laws of New Cybertron. So they're setting their own laws, and they're hunting down old Decepticon members that have pledged allegiance to the new Cybertron. But it's not just Decepticons that they have to deal with. They also deal with Dinobots and Autobots through here. There's some really amazing stories. And Hot Rod. Now, the reason why my daughter and I love this is because we love the characters of the Lost Light. And there's nothing wrong with the series of Robots in the Skies. Or more, Robots in the Skies. But, oh my gosh, do we love John Barber's just wonderful story that he was telling through the pages of the More Than Meets the Eye. Now, those series are about to have a crossover because you have to remember that this is also a licensed property. So from time to time, I think annually, there would be a crossover that leads into things like the Combiner Wars or Revolution. And those were pretty much used to just introduce a new toy line. But I'm glad they did, because that's how I ended up getting Metroplex. Now, I mentioned Adventures in Space, right? I said, like, that's why we like it. But, oh, man, it's so much more than that. It is so much. There's so much drama. There's a couple of love stories here. There's a couple of just side stories that take you by surprise. And this is the monstrosity. Remember when I said it was a trilogy of stories that take place in the past, but also showcasing what's going on with Optimus Prime, too. Remember when I said he left Cybertron? Well, you can't keep a Uncanny Omar talk pretty one day. A good bot down. Now, like, poor Bumblebee has to deal with this boring part of politics in Cybertron. But there's a good story there, too. Like, you have the return of Megatron, and he comes back a completely different character. RC, you know, she was a one-dimensional assassin in the first phase. In this, she kind of gets a big redemption story arc. You do see the crew run into Overlord again from the pages of Last Stand of the Wreckers. And oh my gosh, is there heartbreak. Like, there is so much heartbreak that happens through here. So don't get used to your favorite characters, because more than likely, they might not make it. And that's all I will say about that. So now we're moving on to Volume 5. Ultra Magnus here on the cover. Even Ultra Magnus himself has a couple of secrets. And here's the Primacy, the first one. Robots in Disguise is about to have a change, though, a name change in a little bit. And this is Livio Ramondelli's artwork, beautiful artwork here, who's just loves drawing bots. And what's okay, so I mentioned that the Lost Light crew, also reintroduces us to characters that were pretty much used in Japan only, or were just toys here in America. But the Robots in Disguise comic also do that too. There's a couple of characters that show up that were part of a different line. Like the Pretender showed up in Phase 1, but they're redone in the way that Simon Furman wanted to redo them. There's characters that show up here, like the Dark Cybertron characters, that were meant to just kind of sell some toys because they had the Dark Cybertron. Actually, I think they do. So, continuing this reading order with Volume 6 right now. Starscream getting a new look, and that's one of my favorite things. But you have characters like Waspinator coming in here. Not really canon with the Beast Wars comic that IDW finished out, that Dreamwave started, but his own kind of character. And he's not the only character from Beast Wars that will show up through here. The Dinobots, you never know what the hell they're thinking or doing. They either are playing the good guys or the bad guys, and they can't swear an allegiance to anybody. And there are still a couple flashback series that take place in the past. There are new characters that appear through here, and Windblade is one of those characters. She's a fan favorite. As a matter of fact, I think she ended up appearing in the Robots in Disguise comic. That's how much of a fan favorite she was. And, we have her own toy now, but she's the character that first appears through these pages. Character that comes from another planet, because remember when I said when the war was over, it was time to call the rest of the Cybertronians to come back to Cybertron, because now we can live in peace. So again, the way these are mapped, they're done in the best reading order possible. James Roberts still writing The More Than Meets the Eye, and John Barber still writing Robots in Disguise. Something big happens here, though, in the More Than Meets the Eye. And that is the addition of Megatron. After a big crossover, Megatron ends up joining the Lost Light. Now, is he pretending to be a good guy to, get revenge later on? Well, you can try to find out for yourself. But, oh my gosh, does he add a whole new element to the Lost Light. And there's a reason why so many fans adore this particular series. The hijinks in space is just part of it. But all these new characters, like I was telling my buddy Dan, who's also a huge Transformer fan, and there's Drift finally getting a cover, that I've never seen so much cosplay for Transformers until Phase 2. Phase 2 started and people were just freaking cosplaying like crazy. Now, in Volume 8 is when you're going to see the title Robots in Disguise dropped. And that was because IDW did not want to confuse people with the new animated show. So More Than Meets the Eye continues, still being called More Than Meets the Eye. Robots in Disguise is dropped, and it is just called Transformers. And in here, you're also going to see another Drift series and the Punishment miniseries. And we still focus on Earth, because we still have some Transformers that refuse to move back to Cybertron or join Rodimus with his crew on the Lost Light. One of them being Thundercracker. And Thundercracker decides to become a screenwriter. I swear, it's things like that you're going to find through these particular comics. And you're going to see characters that appeared in Japanese series, as I've mentioned before. Now, the next volume will have Windblade on the cover here. Yes. Getting her second miniseries in this particular collection. So now we're having another crossover that's about to start, and this is the Combiner Wars crossover, if I'm not mistaken. And this is when the big gestalts, the big guys, come in and take a big part in all this, whether they're on Earth or whether they're fighting on Cybertron. This is their story. And this really helped, oh my gosh, like bring out so many toys that Hasbro was putting out. This is one of my favorite issues right here. And this is, of course, a take on the Justice League International. But this is when they go into a planet where they have to pretend to be human. And I love their human avatars for some of these characters. Rodimus completely makes sense. But if you've seen the original series, Season 3, where they have human counterparts, kind of reminds me of that. Oh man, the relationships through here, and I don't want to spoil who's with who, are just beautiful. And what ends up happening to some of these characters, you'll just sit down and say, that's not fair. That character didn't need to go out like that. That's messed up. And a new Combiner too is what we get on the cover this time around. So this is the Combiner Hunters storyline. And then you have a follow-up to The Last End of the Wreckers. This time just written by Nick Richey. And this is Sins of the Wreckers, this particular miniseries. Windblade continuing with the ongoing series now. And there's Victorian, who makes her cover appearance here. She was... Actually, they did make a toy of that character, too. So if you're interested in collecting the toys. Now, as I'm sitting here flipping through here, I know most of you know, but in case you don't know, IDW ended up losing the license, and we'll talk about the next phase after I'm done with IDW. But a lot of these books are out of print. So even though they're out of print, I know most of my viewers wanted me to keep doing these reading orders, because there's a chance you can run upon them, you know, at a comic book store, go to the next book, or a convention, or maybe somebody online. But they're also available in trade paperbacks. And there's always a chance that Skybound, who's the new license holder, could reprint these. Maybe not in this format, but in some kind of format. So it always helps, you know, to show people what the art looks like, to talk a little bit about the stories, in case they're interested, or if they're like, man, I'm glad I'm not reading that junk, and I'm happy with my Daniel Warren Johnson Transformers, or the Void Rivals. So just wanted to make sure that you knew, you know, even though I'm doing this, a lot of these, most of these, as a matter of fact, now, as of this video, are out of print, these hardcovers. And just flipping through here reminds me just how much I miss this damn era. This is the return of Optimus Prime back to Cybertron, you know, struggling to find his place there. Galvatron makes a return through here, and he wants to destroy Earth again. You have the Decepticon Justice Division, the DJD, that's all led by Tarn, and it's about to go into a big event. I mean, those are the crazy characters. This guy right here and his crew are the crazy characters that are torturing and killing Cybertronians. And the payoff, my gosh. I remember there was a whole debate as to who was behind that mask, who was behind Tarn's mask. Volume 12. So here we have the Titans Return storyline. We had the Combiners War story. Now we had the Titans Return. There are characters here that you may think that look familiar to you, but there's a couple of Easter eggs that also show up through here. And this particular crossover, Titans Return, ends Phase 2. I mean, one could argue that there's really only two phases. There's Phase 1 and there's Phase 2. But I don't know if it was a decision by IDW or Hasbro. They decided to do a Phase 3. And Phase 3 feels more like the Hasbro phase. And I'll explain what that means here when we look at Phase 3. Now, Phase 3, I regret to inform you, was not finished in hardcover format. As a matter of fact, I'm going to tell you what trade paperbacks to get. And I've got a couple of them to show you. But I refer to this as the Hasbro universe, because what IDW ended up getting was a lot of the Hasbro properties. They had G.I. Joe, they had Mask, they had ROM, they had Micronauts. So this was their way of saying, okay, let's make sure all of these toy lines are now in one shared universe. So we kick it off with this Revolution story. That's a crossover with the Transformers. You're going to see some characters here from Transformers, and then you're going to see some characters from Mask, from G.I. Joe, from ROM, from Micronauts, and a couple of other Hasbro properties. But it was a really interesting era for Transformers, and focusing less and less on the things that we were doing with the earlier phases, like mainly phase 2, right, exploring space. But that does come back. This is just the first volume. We have 2 more to go through. So in volume 2, we do get the return of those More Than Meets the Eyes and the Lost Light. So what happens is the series are relaunched. Now we have Optimus Prime 1 through 6 that replaces the Transformers Robots in the Skies comics, or just Transformers. We also have Till All Are One, and that's the series by Marjorie Scott, and then Lost Light, which of course takes place instead of More Than Meets the Eye, still by the same creative team of James Roberts. But this is the type of stories now. They're a little more grounded, a little more connected with Earth. As a matter of fact, Optimus Prime does take place a lot on Earth, while the Lost Light is still out there in space having hijinks in space. And it's interesting because like characters from G.I. Joe are now playing a big part in the Optimus Prime comic. And some people dug that. Some people don't want any humans in their Transformer comics. Lost Light isn't really... I don't think it's really a good jumping on point, honestly, because it's a continuation of More Than Meets the Eyes. And there's a couple of... there's a lot of characters that are introduced in More Than Meets the Eye. And new characters are introduced through here. But the whole concept about, this rivalry between Rodimus Prime and Megatron as to who will lead the Lost Light, and talking about dead members and things like that, that all comes from Phase 2. So as I mentioned, sadly, this line was not finished in hardcover format. So we have IDW Collection Phase 3, Volume 3. But I am going to tell you what other trades to get. Again, if you want the written order, I'll put that up on Patreon. But, even the stories in here lead into some trade paperbacks, like the whole Revolutionaries, and then the Revolutionaries Volume 2, Revolution Road to Revolution. All that ties into Transformers. But yes, Revolutionaries is one of them. Volume 1, The Crisis, Intervention. And then Volume 2, that's the way I suggest reading them, Power and Glory. Those are your next 2 books to get after this one. And then Transformers Optimus Prime Volume 3. Definitely need that in there. There's a mini-series, Transformers versus the Visionaries. Remember when I said this was part of the Hasbro universe? Yeah, I meant it. ROM versus Transformers mini-series. It's a 5-issue mini-series. Then you jump back to Transformers Optimus Prime Volume 4. Transformers Lost Light Volume 3, Transformers Optimus Prime Volume 5, and then after that, Lost Light Volume 4. And sadly, the last book you get is available, and these, again, all those that I just mentioned are available in trade paperback. The last book is Transformers Unicron. Not in a hardcover, but it is in trade paperback just like the others. And this is it. This is written by John Barber, Alex Milne, who was, of course, the artist that kicked off Phase 3, or Phase 2, really, with John Barber. And, oh my gosh, when I said, don't get used to your favorite Transformers, this book pulls no punches. This is the end of the Transformers era from Phase 1, that started in Phase 1. It all comes down to this. There's a lot of characters that die here. And yes, when you have a story called Unicron, you are talking about Unicron. And the payoff for the Lost Light, the payoff for More Than Meets the Eye, the payoff for Optimus Prime, the payoff for all of the Transformers that you have been reading since Phase 1 is told through this trade paperback. Now, even though they did not finish Phase 3 in hardcover, there was a reboot when IDW still held the license. a reboot within the same publishing company. Now, we've seen that before. I mean, DC has done it. Marvel's done a soft reboot with Secret Wars, but this is a real reboot. None of Phase 1 or Phase 2 or Phase 3 are necessary to be read before reading this. This is The World in Your Eyes, Volume 1. So they are really starting over here. This is by Angel Hernandez and Cachet Whitman are the artists. Brian Ruckley is the main writer on here. You still have one-shots, but this is all in the Infinite Universe. And in the Infinite Universe out there is Cybertron, home to the Transformers. So you get to know these characters again. I remember reading this one. It's a little bit of a slow burn. It's like a crime mystery. Like the war isn't really taking place. This is the Cybertron of Orion Pax and Megatron. There's not a big war happening, but you can see the beginnings of one. It's more of a rivalry as to who's going to take over this particular planet. Who will lead this planet? Now, you are going to see characters, fan favorite characters from the previous series, and also new characters that were introduced through the pages of Phase 2 and Phase 3, and new characters that are introduced through this particular series, such as the character of Chromia. Chromia plays a big part in here. She's part of the security operations. So it's a whole rise of terrorists that is happening through these pages, and they have to figure out who is behind this. Is it somebody on Megatron's side, the Decepticons, or is it somebody on Optimus Prime that wants him to win the leadership of Cybertron? Interesting, a little bit of slow burn, but we finally get to the point of what this is all about. So this is Volume 3, All Fall Down. By this point now we have this crisis. We have this big war that's happening. This is all taking place. I think the first part of this is taking place in the Cybertron's inner moon, and how it just falls to the planet. You're going to see familiar faces through here. So, I mean, it was nice to have a Transformers comic every month. I know some people were upset that this wasn't a continuation of Phase 1, Phase 2, or Phase 3. And I know a lot of us were heartbroken when we found out that they were not going to finish Phase 3. And honestly, Phase 3 would have taken, I think, 3 or 4 more of those oversized hardcovers to wrap up that entire era. This is the declaration of war. But they did at least rush these out to get these done. Brian Ruckley still writing the stories in here. Patrick Eller's coming in to do I think it was the Valentine's Day? No, that was an Escape story. Now, in this book right here, and for the rest of the series, the Cybertron has gone through the Civil War, and the Decepticons have now officially overthrown the Senate, and the Autobots are left without power. And you have characters that play a bigger part through here, like Sentinel Prime plays a huge part through here. Who wasn't that big of a player in the original, or, I'm sorry, I keep saying original, but I meant Phase 1 and Phase 2. So this is Horrors Near and Far. And this continues again, the new vision, or the new incarnation of Transformers. And this is when the Autobots have to start making alliances with other characters that they normally wouldn't be working with. But they have lost all kinds of hope. You know, they're running low on Energon and they're running low on morale. So it's time to take back Cybertron. You are going to see some... I enjoyed this about the series. Some Easter eggs, too, of characters that appeared through Season 3 in this particular series. Now, War's End. This is it. Interesting that they have Devastator there. But War's End is the final volume of the hardcover that wraps up this series. And again, Brian Ruckley writing this particular series. So this wraps up Transformers, and it also contains the Transformers War's End, and then the fate of Cybertron. Now, there is something that I like to think is a story kind of like The Last Ronin. And that is Transformers Last Bot Standing. It's a 4-issue miniseries that really, Last Bot Standing, it's exactly what it states it is. It is the last robot far away from all the stars and Cybertron. And who is it? Well, I think to me, like, that could be taken place at any time, and it could be set in any universe. The Marvel universe, the movie universe, the animated G1 universe, the Phase 1 universe, and that's why I decided to put it there towards the end. There's also things like Star Trek versus the Transformers, Transformers versus the Terminator, and I've talked about the Transformers 84 series, Secrets and Lies, but I wanted to make sure I did not leave anything out. It's another one, and I think I talked about the My Little Pony, the Back to the Future, and then there was also the Shattered Glass series. But the last thing I'm here to talk about, so in 2022, IDW lost the license to Transformers. Well, in 2023, it was revealed that Skybound had the license. And the way they revealed it was a comic book at a comic book store. Retailers were told to keep quiet. And Robert Kirkman and Lorenzo De Felici are the creators behind Void Rivals. And when Void Rivals 1 came out at comic book stores, you know, people didn't really know what it was until news broke that this is a continuation of not just Transformers, but the G.I. Joe universe as a whole. And that's where you're going to find Transformers these days. You're going to find it in the pages of Skybound Images, Void Rivals, and of course, Daniel Warren Johnson's Transformers. G.I. Joe's over there too with Duke and Cobra Commander. And no trade paperbacks are out of those yet, as of this video, but I did want to point out that Void Rivals is where it all starts for the Skybound / Image era of Transformers. And that, as they say, is that. Now, everybody, transform and roll out. I had to say, I don't give a crap if it's cringy. Had to be said. If you're interested in purchasing some of these books that are still in print, or if and when they come back to print, check out our sponsors. CheapGraphicNovels.com, your online home for graphic novels and collected editions up to 50% off cover price. They have excellent shipping and prompt and helpful service. Check out their bargain deals for up to 90% off cover price. And don't forget that CGN also takes pre-orders. That way you don't miss out on the hottest releases. And they are currently running a special promotion for you Minties. If you're a first-time customer, after receiving your order confirmation email, reply back to that email and let them know Near Mint Condition sent you their way. They will then apply a free shipping promotional credit to your next order in the US. Cheap Graphic Novels, your source for the hottest books with the kind of deep discount, quality shipping, and customer service that will keep you coming back for more. We did it. That was part 3 of the Transformers Comprehensive Reading Order in collected editions. In the comments down below, please let me know if I left anything out. If you have ideas for the next reading order, I always let our patrons vote for those. And if you're interested in the written documentation, that can be found on our Patreon, and the link is in the description down below. That's it, everyone. Till all are one.